You will not have a healthy thyroid if you do not have healthy adrenals. It is physically impossible. 1,000 trillion billion % impossible. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Jacque Show. I am feeling very called to talk about this topic today. And, Instagram shut me down for like a week and a half or so. And then I switched over to TikTok, and TikTok was allowing me to post content still. And I didn't realize how many people were being lied to, how many people were being manipulated whenever it came to thyroid health. And then I also understood that people didn't understand what is even going on in the realm of thyroid health. They're just being put on these medications. They have no idea what these medications do. I've had people who've been on medications for 20 plus years. One lady was saying that she still has flu-like symptoms. I think she just got put on anti-anxiety medications. So this is going to be a pretty heady, a pretty nerdy podcast. And I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. And I'm promising you, and I'm promising myself, that I'm going to try to speak slowly. There is going to be a larger view of words that maybe you never heard of before. We're going to go over what you should have tested on a thyroid panel as well, which is another huge thing. People are just getting tested. See, I got carried away there. People are just getting tested for TSH, or a thyroid stimulating hormone, but they're not getting the really important markers tested. Just like cholesterol, and everyone's like, oh, my cholesterol is high, my HDL, LDL. That's the only three that they really talk about. But then I'm like, what's your blood sugar look like? What's your triglycerides look like? Did you get a homocysteine measurement? Did you get a CRP? So we're going to go over this. And again, I'm going to go as slow as I can. You might have to listen to this in half speed or normal speed and then re-listen or re-watch. But you can find, because we're going to be going over the HPA and the HPT axis today. And then my part 2 will be kind of intertwining that with the HPG axis as well, which is where we talk about a lot of issues with fertility. When I say people are stressed out, that's why. Stress is going to have a profound impact on that. So let's dive in today. So I'm going to start off. If you're driving, for load, Pete, don't put these words down. Listen, you can listen, but I'm going to get into it in the very beginning of this, so that way you can go back, listen at the 3-minute mark, and maybe longer, 5-minute mark, I don't know, wherever we are in this, wherever this gets edited to, and then start taking notes down for your own legend, okay? Because this podcast is going to make you smarter than your endocrinologist. It's true. So I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to empower you to be in charge and in control of your health. Now, when I talk about the thyroid, just like I talk about the heart, it is a response organ. Okay, what does a response organ mean? A response organ means that it is going to adapt to different stressors, to different environments inside the body. So it is rarely a primary problem, okay, which means thyroid conditions or your thyroid malfunctioning is very rarely a problem with the thyroid itself, but a problem with something else in the body, which is why medications never work. They might make you feel good for a certain period of time because they're going to manipulate your body, but then they're going to sacrifice other areas of your body. And it's just like spraying over your check engine light. You're not really getting to the bottom of it. So here we go. We're diving in. I'm going to stop procrastinating. So HPA axis is going to be the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Pituitary adrenal axis. HPA axis. Anytime you hear the HP, hypothalamic pituitary, the A is going to be adrenal, the T is going to be thyroid, and then axis. So we're going to have some stuff that's going to be going back and forth between the two, okay? There is another thing called CRH, corticotropic releasing hormone. Corticotropic releasing hormone. There is ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So adrenals, corticotropic hormone. ACTH. Very important to talk about. All these are. TRH. Okay, TRH is thyroid releasing hormone. TSH is going to be your thyroid stimulating hormone. Then my favorite to talk about, RT3 or reverse T3. It's one of the most common ones that people don't get tested. So let's talk about the test. When we test people for thyroid health, we want to see everything. And if you look through my TikTok comments, people are like, what do you test? What do you test? I don't even initially say, hey, let's test your thyroid. I go, let's test your gut. Okay, let's do a stool test because peripheral conversion, okay, so conversion of T4 to T3 outside of the thyroid takes place down in the gut. If your gut is abnormal, you're going to decrease that conversion, right? T4 is inactive thyroid hormone. That's like your synthroid, things like that. And then your T3 is your active. So I think it's Cytomel is one of the big ones that people will get, which is like a straight T3 supplement. Okay, now we're going to talk about how it works, but we're also going to talk about why that's not the best thing to do because we have these things called feedback loops, but we'll get there. So what do we test? We want to test TSH, sure. Okay. Oh, the other test is a stool test and then do an adrenal and hormone panel. Okay. And if you wanted to throw in a thyroid, go for it. Not usually my first test. Okay. The only time I really do that, I had a patient who was told that she had to get her thyroid removed. She was in a teenage age. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So we worked on her thyroid, got her off medication, and her doc was like, what happened? Your thyroid is totally normal. And so they're doing like the scary stalking, like, well, we'll check every 6 months just to make sure it's okay. It's going to be because we fixed the cause. The gut was a mess. Anyways, so when it comes to specific testing for the thyroid, yes, we can do TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That's cool. T4, you can do free in T4. T3, same thing, free T3. And then when you convert down, I want to know what your RT3, your reverse T3 looks like, because that's, again, another like storage pouch of an active T3. It's not going to do anything for you. Stress response has an impact on that. Okay. Then you got your T4, your T3, reverse T3. Then I like to see your antibodies. There's 2 different antibodies that you can get tested for. That's going to confirm the presence of an autoimmune disease, okay, where your body is physically attacking itself, autoimmune. So without those 2 markers, okay, without the thyroid antibody markers, you are not able to definitively say if you have an autoimmune disease. Okay, really important. And I'm laughing saying this, but the amount of people who are like, oh, somebody grabbed my thyroid and ran a TSH and said, I've got Hashimoto's, or my thyroid's too fast, so now I've got Graves' disease. I've had people who are diagnosed with Graves' disease. So Graves' disease comes with, you're really small, very difficult for you to keep weight on. It does have some hormonal play on that as well. And then you'll get a condition called exophthalmosis, where it looks like your eyes are just bugging out of your head. That's your Graves' disease. So it's, this patient was overweight, to be nice about it. She was overweight. Her TSH lined up with a hypothyroid, and her endocrinologist told her she had Graves' disease. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Yeah. Anyways, you're going to be smarter. Again, you're going to be smarter than these endocrinologists by the time you're done with this. Okay. So panel, TSH, get your T4s, your T3s, reverse T3s, get your thyroid antibodies, and then I like to see your iodine. I do. Because if you have iodine deficiency, if you're not getting iodine in your diet, okay, then you're not going to have the building blocks for your thyroid hormones. It's like trying to build a house without bricks, right? So it's one of those markers that I really like to get whenever it comes to actually analyzing the thyroid, okay? And then the reference ranges from a functional standpoint are going to be highly different, especially your TSH compared to what your normal medical doctor is going to consider. There's like a 5-point swing you can have with TSH from like 0.5 to like 5. And like, oh, you're good. That's a huge swing. It really is. But I also hate TSH as a measurement. I hate it because it can change. You can get your blood tested 78 times throughout the day, and you can probably get 78 different types of results that come back from that. Okay. So when you're getting your thyroid analyzed, when you're like, oh, my doctor told me this, my doctor told me that, be sure that you got this stuff measured. If you didn't, then it's an incomplete test, and it's not right to be able to diagnose something. And people are like, well, why don't they do that? Well, they've got like 1 or 2 medications that they can use. Synthroid or levothyroxine, you've got a T4, and then sometimes they'll stack like a T4 and T3. That's all I got. What are they going to do for you if you've got antibodies attacking your thyroid? They're not going to give you something to address that. They might give you an immunosuppressant, which is one of the dumbest things in the world, because usually it's an infection that caused the disorder to begin with. Then you're going to lower your immune system, allow that infection to get stronger, and you're thinking it's going to stop the thyroid antibodies. Or what if a new virus comes through? What if a new, stomach virus, whatever respiratory virus comes through? Well, your immune system's weak. So, what are you going to do? You can't treat those things. So it's really important to understand, when you're going to your endocrinologist, when you're going to your medical doctor, they have certain tools in their tool belts that they're going to use. So it's not necessarily their fault. They're just doing what they were taught. They were doing what they were told to test. They're doing what insurance allows them to do because they're shackled to it. And that's one of the reasons why we don't accept insurance. Yeah, it might be a pain in the butt for some patients, but realistically, I don't have any shackles on what I do, which is why we get the results that we do. I don't have an insurance company telling me that I can only run this or only prescribe this or only give this. I'm a man of my own. And again, we get those results because we're able to do those deep dives. If you came in and you were complaining of thyroid issues, and I'm like, well, I'm going to run a stool test. An insurance company were like, why the hell are you running a stool test? This is a thyroid problem. Run your basic thyroid panel. Don't step outside the lines of the thyroid panel, but run a thyroid panel, right? My hands will be shackled. If I do that, then it can sometimes be seen as malpractice, or insurance company will not reimburse me for that test. So therefore I'm losing money on the transaction, right? So again, understanding if you're going to an endocrinologist, if you're going to a medical doctor, you're only going to get a couple things. You're only going to get medications. You're only going to get surgery. You're only going to be told that there's something wrong with your thyroid, or there's nothing wrong with your thyroid, which is what most people are told. And if you only have a TSH and T4 and T3, and you're like, oh yeah, your thyroid looks great, but what about the antibodies? Why do you have a goiter on the side of the neck? And you're like, oh, my TSH is perfect. Excuse me? Why is it there? Right? So honestly, there's a lot that goes into this, and we're going to talk about this. But another thing that is important to talk about, I'm going to slow myself down again. I got carried away again. We're going to talk about feedback loops. Okay, feedback loops. So you can have a negative feedback loop, or you can have a positive feedback loop. Okay, everything in your body communicates to each other. Okay, everything. There's not a single cell in your body that doesn't know what a cell on your toe is doing. If you have a cell in your head and your brain, it knows what the toes are doing. Like, everything is interconnected. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful system. So when we have a negative feedback loop, right? And that's something where if we have an excess of, say, a hormone, then it's going to radio back to the brain or the area that's creating it and saying, hey, negative feedback loop, let's stop this. We don't need any more stimulation because we've got plenty down here. Okay, that's a negative feedback loop. A positive feedback loop, loop is a fun word to say. A positive feedback loop is if we're deficient. If we don't have enough down here, well, then what are we doing? We're looking to send a signal back up to the manufacturing plant and say, hey, we're deficient here. Wake up. We need you guys to send more signals down so we can create more hormones. Okay. There are phenomenons in the body that can cause these to happen. But then this is why I'm not exactly a proponent for hormone replacement therapy. There's a time and a place for that, but hormone replacement therapy, bioidenticals, medications that replace things that are naturally created in the body, because what's going to happen is if you put something in from the outside, all right, so an outside in approach, an allopathic approach, a medical approach, you're then going to send back a bunch of negative feedback loops, okay, saying, hey, I've got it. Don't worry about it. I don't need any T4. Calm down the TSH. And that's usually what people will try to measure, right? So say you had an overstimulating thyroid, right? Your T4 will say it was low. So your T4 is low, then boom, it's going to radio back to the HPA axis, say, hey, I need more of this. Get that TSH firing. So it's going to go up, and then it's going to start sending signals back down. Okay, we got enough T4. Now, if you synthetically put T4 in, negative feedback loop will go back up. I think I said negative last time, maybe meant positive. A negative feedback loop will go up and say, hey, Jacque has this thing coming in from the outside. He doesn't need any of that T4. So brain, stop telling the HPA axis to make, TSH. We don't need any more thyroid stimulation. We don't need it. We're good. Okay. Then, in my opinion, those areas will then atrophy. Okay. So that if you came off the medication, they're just like, it's like a couch potato. They're just sitting there the whole time like, cool, I don't have to do my job. I could be super lazy right now. And then these people are like, hey, you need to come off these medications. And the thyroid's like, wait, huh? What? And so you'll have this massive deficit of thyroid hormones. And then if your brain's still working properly, that feedback loop should wake back up because you've robbed your body of it. So then your HPA axis should be like, oh, shoot. We now have to go into hyperdrive to make sure that we're filling this T4 back up because we're no longer getting it from the outside, right? So that's the big examples here with your feedback loops. Your negative feedback loops stops things. Your positive feedback loops create things, okay? It's just kind of how it works. So I know we're like, oh my gosh, you're spending so much time on HPA or HPT axis. They're interconnected here. I'm going to paint this picture for you. There's a great graphic. I have it right in front of me, but this is all Googleable stuff. All right. It's not, it's scholarly for sure, but it's not that difficult to understand, right? So we're going to start with the HPA axis first. So what does HPA axis stand for? Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So HPA adrenal axis. What's happening? All right. So HPA axis starts just like the HPT axis starts. It's going to start in the hypothalamus, hence hypothalamic. Starts in the hypothalamus. What's going to happen is the hypothalamus on the HPA axis is going to have two things that can be released. Number one is going to be your CRH. So that's going to be your corticotropic releasing hormone. Corticotropic releasing hormone. And that goes and it smacks your pituitary gland. Your pituitary gland's like, oh, cool. I need to make ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. That goes down to the adrenal cortex, which is like the shell on the adrenal glands, goes down and hits in the medulla and says, hey, we need to create what are known as catecholamines. I almost said catecholamine because we have a product for that, but it creates catecholamines. Catecholamines are things like epinephrine, norepinephrine. It's your adrenaline. A piece of this that a lot of people don't understand is there's one more thing that gets involved in this whole process, and it's aldosterone. Now, aldosterone is huge for the kidneys. Now, the adrenal glands sit atop the kidneys, right? The suprarenal glands. That's what the adrenals are. So if we have issues with aldosterone, we can have issues with our sodium, we can have issues with swelling, we can have all these other issues that I won't get into in this podcast, but it does make me want to do a separate podcast on. Maybe I will. Again, we're stimulating. Now you can have a hypostimulation where you're just like, all right, I need a little bit more, right? Just a little bit more here. Or you can be like, oh shit, I'm getting attacked by a bear right now. I need just flood. And it goes through. Right? You got your hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal, boom. You have all those catecholamines being produced so you can fight or flight. There are so many different areas that I can go off on tangent, and I'll just throw little snippets there so that way it can give you, some things to think about, something to chew on a little bit. But when you're in that fight or flight response, you are no longer in your rest and digest, which means all of the blood and function is now going out into your muscles. So your digestion is terrible. Stomach acid drops. Brain function's not exactly the best. Okay. Chronic stress shrinks down your hypothalamus. Not a good thing. All right. Shrinks these things. And then all of a sudden you're left not knowing what the heck is going on. That's why they say, adrenal issues can soon lead into things like Alzheimer's. Okay. Because it damages the brain. The other thing it does is it damages your muscular tissue. It releases amino acids for fuel source. Makes you magnesium deficient. We talk about magnesium. Okay. I think everybody kind of talks about magnesium at this point. I know JP Sears talks about it, which I love his stuff. Side note, little plug for him. So anyways, going back to that, right? So you have your HPA axis, you have your signals coming through, and then there are cross signals that go between your HPA axis to your HPT axis. Now, what impacts the hypothalamus? Okay. There is psychological stress. There is trauma that can come and get you. And this could be trauma of getting beat upside the head like I did in 2009, almost died. Could be trauma like that. Or something that my wife is working with and a lot of other people around Scottsdale and stuff are working with is that generational trauma that like you're peeling back these layers and you're like, oh shoot, that's another thing. That's another. So it can be something like that. You can have electromagnetic everywhere, right? If you're not blocking it, it's not the best thing for you. You can have infectious agents. So again, why I talk about doing the stool test all the time is because infections can damage this stuff. Then you go down to allergic reactions, be that food sensitivities or actual full-blown allergies, seasonal allergies, etc. You can have dysbiotic bacteria. We talked about the impact that can have, the inflammation. I mean, inflammation is going to be the root cause of everything here. And then you can have xenobiotics. So mimickers basically going in and causing damage to the body and damage to the hypothalamus. Now, when you have your hypothalamus being stimulated, okay, hypothalamus releases the corticotropic releasing hormone, CRH. And what that's going to do, okay, there's two negative feedback loops that could basically happen. CRH can go back up, okay, if there's a ton of it being produced, goes back up to the hypothalamus and says, hey, we don't need any more CRH. We've got plenty of it. Don't take your foot off the gas. Let us breathe a little bit, right? But then it goes over to your HPT axis, your thyroid, hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, and it inhibits TSH. Let that sit for a second. Okay. It's going to inhibit it. What does that mean? It's going to shut down your damn thyroid. And that's just from the first step. That's the first process, right? So then CRH inhibits your TSH. Okay, but let's keep it going. Then remember CRH, okay, corticotropic releasing hormone, stimulates your pituitary gland. Okay, pituitary gland then stimulates adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. ACTH goes back up again. Everything's designed to be, checks and balances. Make sure everything is equal and opposite, right? ACTH goes back up to the hypothalamus and says, hey, pump the brakes again. We're good down here. We've got plenty of ACTH. Shut this stuff down. I've got this under control, right? So ACTH goes up and inhibits there. But when it does come down and it hits the adrenal cortex and hits the medulla, what's going to happen? A boatload of glucocorticoids. And that. Catecholamines, glucocorticoids are coming out. I don't know why I couldn't say that. Catecholamines, like your epinephrine, norepinephrine, aldosterone, adrenaline, whatever you want to call that, is going to be released. Then what's going to happen? Okay, those go back up to the hypothalamus again. You're seeing a pattern here. Okay. It's not the glands inhibiting it. It's the things that the glands are secreting that are going back up and inhibiting your hypothalamus. So then we have cortisol basically being released. Okay. And that's going to go up and it's going to inhibit your hypothalamus again. All right. So if it's like, hey, we're good. I understand the stress, but the bear is gone. So let Joe up in headquarters know we're good. We're good over here. Okay. Then what happens, okay, is stress will go up and it will hit your T3 conversion. Okay. So it can actually inhibit your conversion of T4 to T3. And then in doing so, T4 will then shuttle that over to your reverse T3. Okay. Which is also a competitive inhibitor of T3. Right? So let's play, for example. Let's talk about the HPT axis. So we have the hypothalamus again. We know that. Then we have TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, hits the pituitary gland. So it's like, hey, pituitary gland, we need you to make some TSH. You go with that? Cool. Awesome. Drops down. Pituitary gland makes your TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid is then stimulated and then secretes your T4. Okay, it's the first hormone that it has there, right? And then your T4 is supposed to be converted into your T3. So you need something called 5-deiodinase. So basically you need this enzyme, okay, which is primarily in the liver and kidneys to convert T4 to T3. T3 again being your active form of your thyroid hormone. So if we, for example, we give you T4, okay, we give you Synthroid, levothyroxine, we give you T4, synthetic T4, okay, you still, if you're stressed, can basically bottleneck that T4, okay, which would make your TSH look great because TSH is radioed back from T4. T4 goes back up to your pituitary gland. We're like, we're good. We've got plenty of T4 here. But if you're not converting it to T3, I mean, you just have this giant pouch of T4. Your numbers look great, but your active thyroid hormone is low or it's null and void. There's nothing there. Or it's being shuttled over into your reverse T3. Okay? So there's a lot that goes into this. And this is why when you get tested, and I'm like, hey, you can get tested 38 times, 78 times throughout the day, and your body will look different. This is why. If you wake up and you've got this beautiful spiritual practice, and you're like, I'm meditating for an hour, and I sip on some cacao, and I play some sound bowls, and I'm just in this state, so calm, and you get tested, your numbers are going to look perfect. Then you hop in your car, and you got kids screaming in the back. You got somebody cuts you off down the street. In Estancia, you've got cows randomly walking across the street, which is going to, freak you out for a second. They're adorable. But nobody wants to come close to hitting a cow with a car. So you get all this stress, and then boom, I take your sample. What's going to change, right? You stimulated your HPA axis, which is then going to shut down your HPT axis. Okay? So that is why it's very rare that your thyroid is the culprit. It's usually these other areas of the body where things just aren't working properly. Now, you can break these feedback loops. Okay, you can break them. How? Going back to your HPA axis, if you are constantly under stress, whether real or imagined, okay, the fear of the next stressful event is not real stress, it's not a real event. You're just so fearful. You're living in that fight or flight. If you're constantly eating horrible food, if you're constantly pounding yourself with antibiotics, or you're not hydrated enough, or you put all of these stressors into your body, or you're, working 80 hours a week, you get the drift here. I'm going to slow my speech down again because, again, I don't want to get carried away. But if we have all these things happening all the time, then you're going to be trying to send back a signal to your hypothalamus to say, we're good. And then boom, you get another stimulus. And it's like, no, we're not. make more CRH, make more ACTH, make more hormones, make more cortisol, make more adrenaline. And your body's like, what is it? What do you want? Like the Notebook quote. What do you want from it? What do you want? Just tell me what you want. And your hypothalamus is like, what the heck do you want? What can I do for you? You're telling me to calm down. Then you're throwing in a stimulus, and I need to make these hormones, but you've been doing this for a long time. This isn't good for you, but then we're going to do that. So there's a lot that goes into play with this. And again, if you look up, if you look up the inserts of like their synthroid levothyroxine, if you look that up, it will say that medication is contraindicated for people who have adrenal insufficiency. So basically people whose adrenals aren't working properly. But when was the last time your endocrinologist was like, cool, your thyroid looks terrible, but let's test your thyroid before I put you on this medication just to make sure this is an actual thyroid problem instead of an adrenal problem or instead of a gut problem. See how the approach would be a lot different? That's an approach of testing the cause, not testing the symptoms. So what's really important to note is you will not have a healthy thyroid, okay? You will not have a healthy thyroid if you do not have healthy adrenals. It is physically impossible. 1,000 trillion billion % impossible, okay? And again, I joke, but it's Googleable. You can know more than your doctor. You can know more than your endocrinologist. It is a beautiful thing. Okay? It truly is. And again, I don't want to go too far on it because we got 30 some minutes into this, but I like itching to go, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go over the HPG axis as well, just because they're just so interconnected. If you can get this all in on one podcast, then by all means, go for it. But if you need a break and you need to just like rest your head for a second, just so you know, if I put you to sleep during this podcast, it's because you don't know these words. Not knowing words tends to put you to sleep. Just a habit. I actually joke around and tell people if you have a hard time falling asleep, go get an encyclopedia and start reading words you've never heard of before. You'll get really sleepy really quick. That's why a lot of people will mess up in school, because there's all these abstract concepts they don't really know about or words they've never heard about. And yeah, you'll go night-night, or you'll fall asleep with your head in a book. So anyways, going back into that. So HPA axis, right? HPA is going to be your hypothalamic adrenal, axis. And then you're going to have your HPT. Okay, so HPT axis is going to be the thyroid. Okay. Then we're going to have our HPG. Okay. Now, why is this important? Okay, so especially because I do so much work with fertility and infertility, I want to make sure that we pay attention to this stuff. Because if we don't nip this in the bud, especially with how much stress people have been consuming, quite literally consuming for the past 2-3 years, if we don't do this, our sterility rate, our hormonal rate, our birth control rate, our inability to conceive rate is going to go through the roof. And then they're just going to pump us full of IVF treatment and then let us know that we have, or not let us know that we have a 7 times higher increased risk for childhood cancers with kids born through IVF. And then they're usually born cesarean. There's other issues. Anyways, so I digress. So HPA axis, again, is going to stimulate in on the HPT axis. And then we're going to talk about the HPG axis. Okay. So we have more words, and that's why I'm laughing here. All right. So we have one more word that we're basically going to be throwing into the mix, and it's GnRH. GnRH. Gonadotropin releasing hormone. GnRH. I feel like I'm in a spelling bee. That's correct. You can sit down now. So if we haven't caught a pattern yet, a lot of work here with the hypothalamus. A ton of work with the hypothalamus. I think is so freaking important for our overall health. Now, I'm going to compare here. We're going to do the HPG for females. We're going to do HPG for males. Okay. So we have our hypothalamus. Okay. We have stimulation here. And then we have GnRH. gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay, being stimulated both in men and women. Then that's going to hit the anterior pituitary. And if you want to see a funny image, I feel like God was laughing at us when they gave us the anterior pituitary gland. But if you look at it, it looks like a different piece of anatomy. But I'm such a child sometimes. Anyways, both, okay, in male and females, both hypothalamus is going to be releasing that GnRH, which is going to stimulate your anterior pituitary gland. Okay. Now from there, we have a release of luteinizing hormone, or LH, and then we have a releasing of FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. Okay. From there, our gonads, okay, are going to be stimulating. For women, ovaries. For men, your testes. From there, we get our primary sex hormones. Men, testosterone. Women, estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so then if we cycle this back, we can have our feedback loops, right? Where our feedback loops from estrogen and progesterone can go up to the anterior pituitary and do the same thing we talked about before. We can have a negative or positive, right? Where we're like, hey, that's enough. We don't need any more. Stop. Or it can go all the way up to the hypothalamus, do the same thing, pump the brakes, or hey, give me some more. For the HPG axis, okay, we're going to have the same type of thing happen, but your testosterone is going to go up to your anterior pituitary gland and say, we don't need any more. Or it's going to go up to your hypothalamus, do the same thing, stop with the GnRH. We don't need it. You just stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. We're good. Okay. Now, these things, again, they're going to be intertwined at least a little bit here, right? So when we have guys, for example, and we're like, hey, I got really low testosterone. And we talked about your thyroid panel, and how we can be missing a lot of markers. There's a lot of markers that are important for your testosterone too. If you just get baseline testosterone measured, then you don't get an accurate representation of what your testosterone is doing. Okay. If you do serum, or if you do a blood hormone panel, we can have FSH and LH measured. Okay. Which would then say, okay, if we have really low testosterone, then we should have high LH and FSH. Okay. That's what we should have, because then it would be like, okay, testes, we need more. If that's not the case, then there are other things that we would want to talk about. Did we do something that damaged our pituitary gland? Did we have brain trauma like I did that, scarred over the pituitary gland? Do we have a benign cyst or benign tumor on the pituitary gland that's not allowing us to create these hormones, which are going to in turn cause us to have difficulties with manufacturing our mainline sex hormones? All things that are possible here, but again, it comes down to properly testing for these types of things. Okay. All right. So then how is this all intertwined? How can we put a nice, pretty little bow on this? Okay. We talked about the HPA axis, HPT axis, and now the HPG. What's important to note is that if we have a ton of cortisol, high cortisol being released, that is going to have an impact on that gonadotropin releasing hormone. So the GnRH is going to be shut down. Okay. If GnRH shuts down, that's going to lead to low levels of FSH and LH, which is then going to cause a decrease in gonadal output of your other hormones. So stress, again, being its own little beast in and of itself, stress is going to cause you to lose your hormones. Okay. That's from an HPA, HPT, HPG axis phenomenon. This isn't even talking about the cortisol steal or the pregnenolone steal that takes place due to high stress. So if we can put a little bow on this, just a little teeny tiny Jacque one, a little bit longer than the anticipated bow on this, what would I say? What would I do? Okay. We need to make sure that when we were working with doctors and we're working with, whether it's somebody like myself, or if you're still going to go to an endocrinologist or your PCP or fertility specialist, etc., If they don't look into any of these things, okay, then they're missing the boat. Can they still get results? Yeah, I mean, people get results doing IVF treatment. They get results doing bioidenticals for sure, but they're never going to get to the underlying cause of the problem. Just like if you take blood pressure medication to lower your blood pressure and you come off your blood pressure medication, you're still going to have high blood pressure. The problem was never solved. In fact, it can be worse because the damage has had 10, 15 years to accumulate in your body. So I am a huge proponent when we are diving into these realms, into these depths, into this information. Take your time, understand this stuff so that way you can be educated on this going into your next doctor's appointment. So again, you can go online and just type in the HPA axis and you'll get a graphic. You can type in HPG, HPT, you'll get little graphics, and you'll have the legend that we talked about in the beginning that will allow you to kind of understand what's happening. It's basically like, hey, this produces this, produces this, produces this, and then it tells it not to produce it. It's pretty easy if you sit with it for a little bit. If you try to rush it and get overwhelmed and emotional about it, it's going to take a long time. So just read it as if you're reading a new book, okay? But hopefully this information, I know I wrote on my TikTok here, I wanted to release this information for them because there's too many questions being asked and too many people not getting the answers that they need. So now I'm stacking the science in with how stress can impact the thyroid and why your thyroid is one of the most improperly regulated organs in your entire body. Okay. So I know a big question, like, well, what do I take for my thyroid? What do I do? How do I solve this stuff? You have to get properly tested first. Okay. That's first and foremost. If you're worried about your thyroid, what test would I recommend you to run? At the very least, a salivary adrenal panel. Okay. So get a 4-point cortisol or, get the cortisol awakening response. We use Genova for that. Or you can do the Dutch Plus, which is your full-on hormones as well as your adrenals, and then do a stool test and get a good analysis on the stool. Again, looking for those triggers, those infections, those things that are going to cause stress into the body. And then the last thing you can do foods test, or if you wanted to get an actual in-depth look of your thyroid, you can do that as well. Okay. If you need help, as always, find me on Instagram, doc_Jacque. Reach out, you know where to get me. So hopefully this resonated with you. And if you need to share this with 1 billion people, go for it, because this is factual information that needs to be out there. So thank y'all. I'm going camping.